Welcome to the Game Table Podcast. My name's Ian, and I'm going to be your host. This week, we're helping Bezier Games celebrate the Year of the Card Game by taking a whole week's look at several of their card games from their catalog. Today, we will be looking at Silver, designed by Ted Alspach, and artists by Jason Bowles and Andrei Gordiev, and TB the Second. Well, welcome to this episode. And again, we will be reviewing and looking at Silver, which is by, again, Bezier Games. So thank you for joining me as I'm here, and you are here, and we are here together. So I appreciate you listening. So today, we're looking at Silver. Now, Silver has a couple different versions. The main version that I have played and purchased was Silver Coin. Now, the original Silver, just base game Silver, came out in 2019, and the Silver Coin came out in 2020, which is the version I have. They have other versions as well. They have Silver Bullet, and they have Silver Dagger. And then they also have another Silver, I believe, that is coming out in the future. And they also have a massive box that has everything in it, if you want that as well. But today, what I'm using as my kind of reference for everything is the Silver Coin. Now, Silver Coin, or Silver, is a 2 to 4 player hidden hand management game, a set collection game, / get rid of the werewolf infestation inside of your village, where players are going to, inside their village, use special villagers to remove werewolves from their community. You'll have to use your deduction skills, be sneaky in your card play, and avoid attracting any werewolves to your village in order to survive. Let's go ahead and review, and I'll kind of go over gameplay and how all the general principles of how this game plays. So let's go ahead and do that now. Like I said, it's a card game. And so the number one thing that you'll do when you start the game is you'll be shuffling this deck. This deck has a lot of different cards in it. It has numbered cards from 0 to 13. And you will deal each player 5 face down cards in front of them. So you'll have this village, so to speak, in front of you of 5 cards. They'll be face down to start, so you will not know what they are. But then you get to secretly, and every player gets to do this, secretly look at 2 of those 5 cards. And so that'll give you a little bit of knowledge on what kind of villagers you have inside your village and what their special abilities are. And so you'll want to remember these numbers, and then as you get more comfortable with the game, you'll remember what their abilities are based on the number. But for your first game, you'll want to look at both because it does take a lot. There's a lot of cards, and you'll want to know the abilities because they're very strong. Once the players have set up the game, you will take turns all the way up until you remove, you call the game basically. Basically, when a person is really, really low on cards in front of them or completely out, that's when the game will end, and I'll get to that. But you'll play through some rounds, and I'll explain that here in just a minute. On your turn, you will do one of the following. Take a card from the top of the deck, which is considered a blind draw. You'll draw, and again, you'll do one of these. Draw the top card of the discard pile, or, like I said before, call for a vote. I will go over these individually, and especially call for a vote. That's how you would end a round, so that's super important. So let's go over taking a card from the draw pile. You will look at the card that you take. You can either use the card for its ability, if you would like, and it would be discarded, or you could take the card and place it in front of you. Now, when you place a card drawn off the top of the deck, you will then place it face down in exchange with one of the cards that you have in front of you. Even if that card that you are exchanging was face up. So let's say you had a face up card in front of you. If you draw a card off the top of the deck, you look at it and you exchange it with something in front of you, the new card still stays face down because it's coming off the deck and that was hidden. So if you think about it that way. Another thing you could do is take a card off the discard pile. Again, exchanging it with one or more of your cards you drew. This is kind of the opposite. When you discard the card, well, one, you discard the card that you're discarding from your own village. So that card goes face up into the discard pile. But then the new card you put face up in front of you. So it's face up in the discard pile. So you'll take it, it's face up, you exchange it face up into your village. And so basically, if you think about it, is the card you're taking, was it face down or face up when you took it, that's where it'll stay in your village. When you do this, there's no ability. You're just strictly exchanging the card. When you draw off the top of the deck, that allows you to use multiple of these abilities. In all these cards, there's cards 0 to 13. There's only two of the 0s and 2 of the 13s, but the rest of the numbers are all fairly good. And they all have their unique abilities and the timing of those abilities. And each box of silver has a bunch of new characters. So I could explain one box to you, but there's plenty of other abilities from all of the other boxes. So in general, I'll go over like some general rules of play. But when we're talking about using the abilities of cards that you draw and using that ability, an example would be, maybe potentially swapping cards out or flipping a card up, a face down card face up in your village. Another one is to exchange something with like the discard or even exchange with another player, look at another player's card. There's a ton of different kind of abilities that are frequently used throughout the game, and each character or villager has a little bit of a twist on those abilities. Some of them have some very specific abilities like the 0 and 13. They do some specific things. I'll get into that. But in general, when you're exchanging cards, you don't get to use the ability, but when you discard it, you get to use that ability. One of the last things you do is call for a vote. Now, if you have 4 or fewer cards in front of you, now, like I said, you started out with 5, and there are ways to gain more. So if you have to have 4 or fewer, and at least one of the cards is still in the deck, so there still has to be at least one card in the deck for you to do this from the draw pile. You may call for a vote. And so you basically just say call. You do this instead of drawing a card or any other action. And so your turn ends, basically. Each of the other players now get one more turn. They may not call on their turn as well. They have to play their turn as normal. So you can't do anything else on your turn when you call for a vote. So you're basically just skipping your turn and calling for a vote. And basically you're saying that I'm going to probably win this round. Usually that's how it goes, or I'm going to try and score. Now, some specific rules that I do want to mention before I go into how the round ends, because that is important. But when exchanging cards in front of you, this is how you lower the amount of cards that you have in front of you. And you're like, well, how do I get to 4 or less? Well, here's how you do that. When you exchange a card that you take from either deck, you can exchange it with cards you have in front of you that that are the same number. So if I have 3 3s in front of me, and I draw a card off the top of the deck, I can exchange it. So I take that one card and then I send the same numbered cards to the discard pile. So if I had 4 of all the same number and I drew a card, I could take that one card, discard those 4 into the discard pile. As you're exchanging cards and you're drawing cards face up and face down, you want to very much keep track of what numbers you have. And you want to get a lot of the same numbers so that on one big turn, you could draw a card, put it face up or face down, depending on when you drew it or where you drew it from, and then discard 3 or 4 cards. You can always discard 2 as well, or 1. You're always exchanging something. But when you have a couple of the cards that are the same number, you can exchange them. Now, you can't do 2 sets of 2 and all that. It has to be the same number. And also, you can do it with cards that are face down. They do not have to be face up to do this. You just have to make sure you remember that, that's an 8. I have an 8 here. When I draw another card, I'm going to discard those 2. If so happen you were wrong, and this does happen, some people kind of mess with your cards in front of you and kind of joggle the memory that you have of your village, and now it is very vague of who's good and who's bad. You will basically have to draw another card. So instead of returning anything, you basically add a card to your village, which is, like I said, a way to add cards to your village. And so that's devastating for your village. Not good. You don't want that. At the end of the round, like I said, when the player has called for a vote or the deck is depleted, that will trigger the end of the round. And so there's kind of this scoring mechanism that I will describe here. So one, and specifically Silver Coin, there's kind of 2 special scoring cards, the 0 and the 13. Basically, the way those cards work, if they're left in your village at the end of the game, so let's say you're not the player that go completely out of cards or something like that. Let's say the 0, and the 0 and the 13. Basically, they either become like a 1, or if your value of your village is less than like 5 or something like that, then it would become a 1. And so basically it lowers your total value of your village. In general, when the game ends, you will count up the value left in your village. So if I have a 2, a 4, and a 6, and somebody else ended the game, I couldn't get rid of any cards, I would add up those cards. So a 2, a 4, and a 6, so I'd have 12. If you have some of these special ability cards that maybe lower your total value, so they're like the 0, and there's some other cards that are like basically counts as your only card if you have only less than a couple cards left, or lowers your total value down to like 1 or something like that. Again, there's so many different variations of all these cards in all the different boxes, and you're welcome to pick through, what boxes you like. But in general, there are some specific end of round abilities that are very strong and very fun to kind of mess around with, because they can change your score in a good way and lower your total value. Because in the end of all this, you are trying to score the least points. And so you want to run out of cards. You want to trigger the end of the game. You want to be doing these things so that the game ends and you don't have any points, really. Now, like I said, players will continue to do this until somebody calls, the round ends. You will play 4 rounds, and when the 4 rounds is over, the player with the lowest points will win. I do want to go over a couple things based on how each edition works. So there is, when you win a round, and so there's only going to be 4. So if you win, and you don't do it for the first round. So round 2, 3, and 4, if you win round 1, you get a token that allows you to use some you can flip it and do something with it that allows you to do something special that nobody else in the game has the ability to do. Now, the base game has an amulet, which allows you to select a card that is not to be removed from your village. You basically you place the amulet on that card. That card can't be touched by you or by anybody else. It can't be manipulated in that way. You can still use its ability, and the card is still scored. So if it's a low card, that's a way to protect a low card, is that because in the low cards do get to be taken or swapped, and there's a lot of manipulation happening throughout the game. This is a way to protect it. You have an amulet that protects it, and that's in the base game. The coin, silver coin, which is the edition I have, basically it allows you, when you use this ability, you flip the coin, and it allows you to flip any card on the board, and that includes other players along with yourself. This can be incredibly strong when you're trying to figure out, okay, what's my last card? Because you're adding up these numbers in your head constantly, and knowing what the back side of your card would be is really strong. There's also bullet, silver bullet, which allows you to select a card similarly to the base game, but it is completely ignored in your village, and it's not even scored. So it basically just cancels this card from your village entirely, which is actually, that's pretty strong as well. So I have not played with that one, but it's very cool. Dagger is one of the other boxes, and it uses the ability to change the direction of play. So let's say you're going clockwise. On your turn, you could flip it, and it would change the order of play, which would go counterclockwise. And it sounds okay, just change play. Like, that's not a big deal. I think it is in this game. Changing the direction of play would be so strong, especially when you're playing behind somebody specifically, or if they have an ability that in front of them allows them to be changing cards out, and you never have a really good discard. Flipping the turn order around could be really strong. So I could definitely see some use for this. It's a kind of a neat little ability. I like all of these. They're not like overtly powerful, but again, they add some variability, and if you win around it, you get a little bit of a buff. So it's kind of cool. Well, that's the how to play. So let's go ahead and go and discuss a little bit more about this game. Well, as we've talked about, welcome to the year of the card game. And this is one that has had games released inside of 2024. Now I know, like I said, I mentioned this, their original, games of this came out a lot earlier, 2020, 2019, and so on. But they do have other games as well that have come out. And they have ones coming out soon, from my understanding. I believe they've discussed even more in more expansions. So you never really know with Bezier, especially in a game like this. A lot of people really like silver, and so there's a lot of expansion that can be done with this game. So I think it's very cool. There are a couple other versions that are coming out or that have come out in 2024. Silver Eye, Silver Fang, and there's more to come, I'm sure, of this. So you can't go wrong here. There's plenty of options. One of the things that this game presents that is a little different in my mind is one. Well, hold on. Let's start. Let's start with the artwork in this game, because Bezier, I mean, I love their artwork. I love this cartoony, very detailed cartoony art that is honestly goofy, but also kind of menacing at the same time. I don't know how they pull it off. I mean, I don't know how you pull off those two things at the same time, but they do. And I find it really interesting on how this art blends with this game specifically. Is you're talking about these kind of villagers, werewolf vibe inside, and you're trying to find the werewolves, and so it's just kind of goofy, but it's in a good way. Is it does provide a little bit of tension in my mind. You're like, I don't know, that character does kind of look kind of scary, but then his eyeballs are big, so it kind of makes him look, I don't know. Like if I were to walk up to him, am I scared or am I terrified, or am I don't know, am I comforted? I don't know. And so that's how this art makes me feel. But it's very good art. Inside the cards, the text box at the bottom, and it tells you exactly what their ability is. The numbers are easy to read and see, even if you give it like a quick little peek when you are like at the beginning of the round. You're like looking at the numbers. It's easy. Once you know them, the abilities, it's very easy to see the numbers. There's quite good definition and a good difference between all the cards as well. Different colors on the cards. So excellent job there by the team of artists that they have. I would say that overall, like as far as this gameplay, I do really like the deduction part of it, is you are constantly trying to remember and also deduct what other players have in front of them and what you have in front of you, because you don't always know all the cards in front of you. Maybe towards the later half of the game, you'll know. But I think there's this interesting back and forth, especially with other players. You're like, okay, well, I saw you take 2 7s, and I know I have a 7. So do I want to discard that knowing that you're next? So there's this back and forth, because you don't want to, what you discard is important. It's not always like you're just trying to figure out how you're playing your game. Like you're also paying attention to what everybody else is doing. And so that's super important to know and use that knowledge in your games. And I think that's really good. Overall gameplay, it's very quick. It's again, it's not anything, it's not like a trick-taking game or anything like that. It's just this kind of hidden hand management and set collection in a way. But that's the way they define it as. Yes, you're trying to get rid of all your cards. So it's like a card shedding game as well. There's a lot of different verbiage you could use. Basically, you're trying to get rid of all your cards, but you're doing that by collecting some sets and using wise deduction and hand management skills to create good combos, which is really cool. This game, like I mentioned before, is 2 to 4 players. It is better at higher player counts. It can be good at 2. I think that's fine. But I think when you're fighting over a couple of the cards with other players, 3 to 4 players is really good. I really like it at that player count, because there's player interaction. And if you're playing with 2, I don't see it as much. It's still a good game. You want to, in a game like this, there is that interaction with other players that you want. So really good there. Now, I'm going to go over real quick of what I like about this game the most out of all these things that I've mentioned. I think the deduction skills that I'm using kind of, and you can card count the discard pile and stuff like that. But you're using these reactionary skills or tactics and strategy and so on that we call, but you're using quick thinking skills when you draw a card. What am I going to do? Am I going to use this ability because that's setting me up for a later turn? Or am I going to pocket it because it's a number that I think that other people will discard? I've seen a couple other discards. There's so many different ways you could play when you draw a card. But this constant kind of like quick thinking, quick decision making, and quick adapting to how the board's being played or the cards being played is fun. And I really like that aspect of it. The management of the cards and the hidden cards that you have and the face-up cards that you have, I think that's really cool as well. You're constantly battling like, okay, well, I don't know what this card is, but I've seen a couple other cards and I've seen people discard these cards. Maybe I could take a wild guess on it. And sometimes you're in a position where when you're discarding cards and you swap and exchange a card out, you're like, okay, I think I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to try and take the risk of like, I think it might be a 4. I have a 4. Let's push these 2 out to the middle and flip it and see what happens. You could get screwed that way, but that is one way to play. And I think there are situations where you could do that, especially if you know what half the deck's been played. Another situation is that somebody has swapped a card with you and you at some point looked at a card, but then it got moved around or something like that. Then yeah, you could use the deduction skills to figure out what that card may or may not be. Especially if they were holding on to it, you're like, well, they gave me this card and they didn't want it, so it might be a high card. Or if you took it from them from some type of ability that you just didn't have a choice, you're like, well, that card they were holding on to, so maybe it's a low card. And then I can use that to my advantage when maybe I can call early because knowing that my hand is lower than everybody else's at the table. So there's quite a little battle of minds here trying to figure out what everybody has in front of them, because again, you're just comparing what your numbers are to everybody else. The person with the lowest score in that round will win, but then you add up the scores as the 4 rounds go by. So whoever has the lowest overall score after all those rounds will also win. But if you score less than everybody at the table for a specific round, that's great. So always take advantage of that. The one thing that I would say that it can be annoying in this game is obviously card draw. You draw one card and it could be the discard pile or the top of the deck. Some abilities are better than others, and it just kind of depends on how you want to play it. So yeah, I would take this game pretty light. Again, I think it's a very fun, light card game. It's not anything deep or heavily strategized. You kind of just react to what's being done and how the other people are playing. I think it's fairly quick. I mean, it's a card game with rounds, so I would say probably around it. If you're playing like 3 or 4 players, you could probably play a game in under an hour, but it's not going to be 5 minutes. This game's going to take a little bit of time. So I would say 30 to 45 with a 3-player game, maybe 2, maybe up to an hour with 4. But if everybody knows what they're doing, you could definitely do it in less than an hour for sure. Well, that will be today's episode. Now, like I said, this is the week of Bezier and the card game, the year of the card game. This one, a little weird. This game didn't come out, like I mentioned before. This game's been around a while, but as we're talking about card games under Bezier's lineup, this is a good one, and it's been around for a while. It's got a great base, and a lot of people really like it already. So we thought it was important to discuss this one. And I personally own it, and I do like it. I think it's a good, great game. I'm not going to do any rating on this. I think this is something that, as far as card games, I really struggle to give ratings on card games because I think every card game in my mind has a unique place, unless it's just garbage. Then I would tell you to stay away from it, and I'm not going to tell you to do that with this game. So therefore, there's your rating. You're welcome. Well, again, thank you for listening. Tomorrow, we will have another card game from Bezier Games that you will get to look at and we will share with you. So please tune in. For today's game, and even for more information, please visit the Game Table Podcast and check the show notes. You can visit our website. You can follow us on YouTube, all the socials, blah, blah, blah. You already know the spiel if you've been listening, but please tune in to tomorrow's episode, not next week, tomorrow. Also, if you want information about these games, message us on Discord as well, or anything, we can give you the information. Bezier's website is a fantastic place for all of their games, and You can do a subscription with them and you get some discounts. It's great. Bezier is great. We love Bezier. Until next time, may your dice rolls and card draws be blessed, and your experiences at the table be ones to remember forever.